Hello again. Well, this is part 3 of the series on what I believe, but this one is perhaps best entitled What I Don't Believe. Because one of the biggest issues I've faced in my Christian life is when people ask me about my faith and think they know what I believe, and I don't believe what they think I believe. Some things about Christianity are hard to swallow. The resurrection is a tough ask because it sounds irrational. I don't think it is, and I'll discuss it at a later episode. But there is a feeling that Christianity and science are incompatible, even sometimes with Christians. I was at a party a few years ago, and people ask you what you do, and I told them, and they did their normal thing, which is to say, how can you, a rational human being, believe that the world was created in 6 days? And I said, well, I don't. I've never believed the world was created in 6 days. And they looked at me and said, and you call yourself a Christian? Now, I was never brought up thinking, as a Catholic schoolboy, that I had to believe the world was created in 6 days, a short period of time ago, 6,000 years ago or so. I never thought there was a tension between science and religion. When I was an atheist because I just didn't believe in God. It wasn't because I had to choose between science and religion and science won. So in this wee video, I thought what I'd do is to go through some of the main questions I get asked about that subject and answer them as clearly as I can. So, first question. So are science and religion at odds with one another? No. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Oi oi, back here. Science has got rid of the need for God. In ancient times, when a volcano erupted, people believed that the god of the mountain was angry, and then they had to sacrifice a virgin to keep him happy and that sort of thing. But we know about plate tectonics and volcanology these days. We have the knowledge, so we know that God isn't involved in that process. We don't need to pray to God for a good harvest because we know what makes a good harvest. We don't have a need for God anymore because we know how the world works. I absolutely agree. The God I worship is not one that will give us a good harvest if we nag him enough. The God I worship is not one who is going to punish us if we don't flatter him enough and pay him enough attention. That's the God of the lucky rabbit's foot. That's not the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. But you still worship a magic God who does good things for you. Christians do believe in miracles. God does magic. That's against science. No, the faith I have is not in any shape or form against the laws of nature because I believe that God is the author of the laws of nature. It simply makes no sense to me that God, the creator, would create this elegant and beautiful universe and then suddenly discover that in order to interact with it, he has to break all the rules he's just made. Why would God paint himself into a corner like that? What, so you're saying that God doesn't perform miracles? Well, it depends on what you mean by miracles, I suppose. Look, say you flick on a light switch and the light comes on. That's science, that's electricity. But if you had never come across electricity before, you would think that that was magic. So the difference between a miracle and science is simply the level of your knowledge. But no, wait, so God does supernatural things. God breaks the laws of physics. God is above nature. What about the resurrection? Well, can he? Yes, by definition, God can do whatever he jolly well likes. But does he? No. Everything has a scientific explanation. If the resurrection happened, it will have had a scientific explanation. The more and more we see the laws of nature, the more we see that they are incredible and mysterious and complex, so much so that anything can and probably already has happened. So it seems to me there is very little God that can't do within the laws of science. That's in keeping with his own laws. The Celtic Christians believed that there were 2 ways in which God spoke to us about himself. The big book and the wee book. The wee book was the Bible, and the big book was the world. Science and the Bible are the tools that God gives us to discover more about him and to grow into wisdom. Yeah, but whenever there is a tension between the two, Christians always go with the Bible rather than the laws of nature, rather than science. Christians hunker back into that medieval nonsense rather than relying on fact. Okay, so here we are back at the law of creation. Science says the universe is 14.6 or so billion years old. The book of Genesis says that it's 6,000 years old and was created in 6 days. Or does it? Doesn't it? No, it doesn't. It really does, you know. I've read it. But why do you take that literally? Because Christians take it literally. Not this one. I don't take it literally, and hardly anybody I've met, and certainly not me. I've never met a bishop who believes in the literal truth of Genesis. I'm not sure I've ever met a priest who believes in the literal truth of Genesis in that way, and none of the great Christian thinkers have ever taken it literally. Look, for centuries people believed in Genesis. Science showed that to be wrong, and Christians just haven't been able to catch up. They're just not living in the modern world. You're living in this fantasy world where you can call upon God like a genie to do what you want. Well, let's see what St. Augustine has to say on the subject, should we? St. Augustine, to my mind, was the greatest genius that has ever existed, possibly, and has the greatest influence on the church after St. Paul. And this is what he says in his commentary on the book of Genesis. Usually, even a non-Christian knows something about the earth, the heavens, the other elements of the world, and he goes on to describe the stars and the planets, laws of nature, and all that sort of stuff. Basically, science. Even a non-Christian knows about science, and this knowledge he holds to be certain and true from reason and experience. Now, it is disgraceful, writes St. Augustine, it is disgraceful and a dangerous thing for a non-Christian to hear a Christian talking nonsense on these subjects. Reckless and incompetent Christians defend their utterly foolish and obviously untrue statements by calling upon Holy Scripture for proof, and even recite from memory passages which they think support their position, although they neither understand what they say nor the things about which they make the assertion. Now, when I read that, I thought it must have been one of those false quotes that somebody's given to sort of justify a more modern understanding of Christianity, but that is from St. Augustine's commentary on the book of Genesis. His conclusion was that God had given us science and he had given us the Bible, so if one contradicts the other, we're not reading both of them correctly. Now, I know you may say he's just dodging the evolution question, but to be fair to him, he was doing that 15 centuries before the evolution question came into being, so, you know, fair play to him. But Christians have always believed the Bible ahead of science. Take Archbishop Usher, for example. Okay, tell me about Archbishop Usher then. Archbishop Usher, well, in 1650, Archbishop Usher, it was the Archbishop of Ireland, dated the age of the earth by reading the Bible and totting up all the ages of the patriarchs and Adam to Abraham and all that sort of thing. So he did that and decided that the universe was created on the 23rd of October, 4004 BC, in the afternoon. Tell me that doesn't contradict science. Well, of course it contradicts current science now, but it didn't contradict current science then. Let's compare Usher's work with two roughly contemporary scientists, Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler, who was a great astronomer. Both of those also calculated the age of the Earth a couple of decades either side of Archbishop Usher's. Usher thought it was, at that point, 1650, 5,050 years old. Kepler thought it was 5,648 years old. Newton thought it was 5,640. That's how the scientists thought the age of the Earth was. You see, they were all going on the very little information that they had, and when they had more information, they changed their minds. Okay, but what about evolution? What about Charles Darwin? Okay, tell me about that one. Well, evolution is the big turning point between science and religion, the sort of famous fulcrum. Darwin published the book The Origin of Species. He proved that God was not the creator of all creatures. It was a blind process called evolution. Species evolved by means of natural selection. That is, the giraffes with the tallest necks could eat the more leaves on the trees, which meant that that genetic trait survived. Survival of the fittest, those that are most fit for their environment. The key point was that it was by natural selection. The environment, not God, decided which creatures survive. There was no need for the magic zap from a creator. So there was no need of God, no need for divine intervention. So firstly, it proved that God wasn't necessary into the process. And to invoke God was, well, unnecessary, it was an extra added on. And secondly, of course, it proved that the earth was millions of years old, which knocked the book of Genesis into a cocked hat. Okay, firstly, well, I'm a believer in evolution. Well, actually, I'm not a believer in evolution because you don't need to believe in evolution because the facts are there to support it. I believe the earth is millions of years old and the universe billions of years old, and that is only incompatible with God if you have this idea of God who is this external force that clicks his fingers to make things happen and breaks the laws of nature. But as we said before, that isn't the Christian God. Let's go back to St. Augustine. Augustine came up with 3 characteristics of God, and one of them was omnipotent, one of them was omnipresent, and one of them was omniscient. Let's deal with omnipresent. So omnipresent meant God is in every atom. Everything that is made is full of God. So it's not God just looking at it, it's God being in it. The whole universe is not just created by God, it is God. So to talk about God needing to zap something would be like saying you have to shout at your own kidneys to get them to work. There's no zapping, because God has set things up to be as they are. You can't get away with that. Look, I want to tell you about this debate on evolution, which settled the matter, as far as I'm concerned, completely in 1860. We'll crack on then. Okay, following the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859, there was a debate in 1860 between the church and science on the subject of evolution. It was called the Oxford Evolution Debate. In that debate, Sam Wilberforce was representing the church. He was the Bishop of Oxford at the time, known as Soapy Sam because he was so oleaginous. Defending the theory of evolution was Thomas Henry Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog, lithe and muscular and intelligent and young. And so you had the young face of science and the old oleaginous face of the church. So Wilberforce stood up and berated Huxley for disavowing the Bible, and asked Huxley if he was descended from monkeys on his mother or his father's side, which got a cheap laugh. And then Huxley stood up and said, well, I would rather be descended from monkeys than descended from a man who uses his intelligence to win cheap debating points, but has no interest in a search for the truth. And that put the lid on it. He said that science was a search for the truth, religion was only interested in maintaining its power bases, which it was, and science has been advancing in the truth and religion has been in retreat ever since. Yes, that's a famous story. And there's only one problem with that story. What's the problem with that story? It proves you wrong. None of what you said is true. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. That story is a really famous story. A famous story in the religion-atheism debate, but it's not accurate. In fact, it's a sort of creation myth for atheism. There are some historical facts about that famous debate between the Church of Science, between Wilberforce and Huxley. But the historical facts are these. For a start, it wasn't 2 people debating, it was 6 or more. It wasn't a debate in that sense. It was a forum, a discussion. Now, according to contemporary reports, Huxley didn't win the argument. Wilberforce was not there as a bishop. He was there because he was a scientist. And everyone on that stage believed in evolution. They believed in the old age of the earth. All of those were undisputed facts. The question was the means by natural selection that they were talking about. Many of the people supporting Darwin were clergy. One of Darwin's greatest supporters was Charles Kingsley, the author of The Water Babies, and he was a clergyman. Another was Baden Powell, priest and professor of maths, and of course the father of the Scout leader. Wilberforce said in this debate, and repeated in a published article, "We have no sympathy with those who object to any facts or alleged facts in nature because they believe them to contradict what appears to them taught in Revelation, i.e. in the Bible." In other words, he was critiquing the origin of the species on scientific levels, not because it contradicts the Bible. In fact, he has no time for people contradicting the origin of species simply because they're misreading of the Bible. And many of his scientific critiques were correct. Humans had not descended from monkeys. They had descended from a common ancestor. Darwin acknowledged Wilberforce's critiques and corrected his book as a result. But that debate has become almost like a creation story for atheism, the birth of new atheism. And like most creation stories, whether it is the book of Genesis or the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's a myth. So you are saying there has never been a conflict between science and religion? No, not at all. There is always a conflict between science and religion, because as the facts change, beliefs have to change, and that can be hard. But if you seek the truth, you will be willing to sacrifice things you thought you knew for the things that turn out to be true. Simone Weil, the French philosopher, said, if ever there is a seeming disparity between God and the truth, you must always choose the truth, because in the long run, disloyalty to the truth will always be disloyalty to God. For me, there are two parts to faith. There are our opinions about God, things that we think are true, be it the virgin birth or the nature of the resurrection, whether angels exist, that sort of thing. Those are our opinions, just like we have political opinions. We change our opinions over time, and sometimes we don't. And sometimes we change our opinions so much that we have to change political parties or even religions. But there is faith, which is far, far deeper than those opinions. A deep-rooted belief that we all have that's different from that, which comes from a different place, which is a belief that this universe is more than just the sum of its parts, and that when we die, we're not just compost. Faith in that sense has released me into seeing science for what it must be and should be, which is one tool in the bag for discerning truth. It's not every tool, it's not the only tool. And religion and prayer and spirituality and mysticism and philosophy and logic, all of these are tools in our bag for discerning truth. And I found that when I used all of those tools in the bag, they pointed me towards God. That knowledge released me in being able to explore issues that I thought were beyond me, such as prayer and spirituality and meditation. Because it's all exploratory, where we've got to employ a multidisciplined approach to exploring God. Now, none of that, I'm fully aware, has anything to do with Christianity or Jesus. I don't think I've even mentioned the word Jesus, other than to mention that I've not mentioned him yet. But we'll do that next week, when we'll tackle the tricky subject of the resurrection. Until then, happy thinking.